All right.
Welcome back, everybody, to 6 Feet Under Exhumed. I am Kari the Mortician and my
I'm Faith.
co-host.
Yep. Faith, that mortuary professor.
Yeah, and we are here to talk about and rewatch with you episode 2 called The Will. So tell us where we kind of ended episode 1, Faith.
So at the end of episode 1, my gosh, I have to think back. I mean, it was the pilot, and we were introduced to the Fisher family. The patriarch dies within the first 2 minutes of the show, which is amazing, as if for a TV show. And it's really just kind of the pilot where we meet all of the characters, get a little bit of kind of what their personality is, what their relationship dynamic is, and learn a little bit about this family that owns and operates a funeral home. They live above it, and just a very little bit about who they are and how they are starting to deal with the death of the patriarch of their family. So it ended with I believe they were at the graveside. They were burying him, and he had been approached by Kroner International, which is, the big bad corporation that has now offered to buy their business. And that's kind of where episode 1 leaves us.
And we literally dive into episode 2, no pun intended, but each episode kind of, as we're starting season 1, is starting with a death. And we don't realize from the first episode that that's going to be where we're introduced into each episode is with a person that is dying, and we kind of see their death and then follow them through the course of whatever services are transpiring. And the gentleman at the beginning of this one dives into a pool, hits his head, and dies.
Yeah.
And we kind of see played out everything that they encounter through his death and such. And we dive more into all these relationships, like right off the bat, we're with David and, his man, and kind of getting to see them in a little more relaxed setting. I love seeing that other side of him.
David is truly, in my opinion, one of the best written television characters of all time. He's so multidimensional, and he's so he's just, Michael C. Hall is a fantastic actor. I was been a fan of his forever because he was a musical theater star, which a lot of people don't know. He actually does, as we go on in the show and you see him singing and doing all that, like he's actually singing. That's really him. And he's such a fantastic actor, but the character of David has so many different layers. And, just as we move through the rewatch, he's really is kind of the central, the narrator almost, in a way, like the story is kind of told, as it happens around him. But seeing him, not the stuffy funeral director, not the guy that's trying to keep everything together for the family, and just be a regular guy. It's almost like, okay, all right, well, we'll give him a chance now, because the first episode he was just so, such a hard ass kind of. But it's nice to get into that second episode and see that there's a lot more to these characters.
Well, and we see him sit down with the widow of the guy who dove into the pool. I think his name was Chandler for some reason. I remember. And, she is young and she's got this baby and she thinks they have all this money. He is so stereotypical what everyone would think a funeral director. So what did he call it? I've made a note. Resting vessel would you like to choose for your loved one? And, it needs to be reflective of his wealth and career choice and his esteem. And let me recommend to you the $9,000 one, which will give him honor and his final resting place. And it's so stereotypical of what
it so is, but isn't it true though? You and I kind of can see through a lot of that stuff. And at least when I'm watching it, I'm thinking, that's the training we went through, though. You know what I mean? Like, you're almost taught to categorize people into what you think they want, because really our goal is to help them get the most out of their services that they can. And they don't know anything about this. So we think that we're helping direct them and advise them towards what we think would best serve them. But when you watch it, it's like, oh gosh, it's cringy. I know. But inside we know he's thinking, well, I took the Aurora training or the Ranger training, and this is what we see. It's It's just
We will
like,
guide them to the resting
yeah,
vessel.
I
He's just
know.
so cold when he
Um,
says it is more than a casket. And I'm like, what? But does it need to be like,
but
what else
is
is
it?
it supposed to do?
But again, we have to remember watching this show back at this was the early 2000s. It was a different time in funeral service
Oh, for sure.
as well. We've come a long way with understanding that families have different wants and needs, and their projected financial status isn't always a reflection of what they're going to choose anymore. But when that show was written, it was a lot more it really was taught to them a little bit more cut and dry than it is now. So it seems like really cringy to us, and it is, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's reflective, I think, of the times, because David would have learned to be a funeral director in the 90s.
Yep.
That was back in the days of full selection rooms, and I mean that's what it was then.
Totally different beast. And
Yeah.
but what I love is then we see Nate go in to meet with her because their credit cards aren't working. They find out that the guy has really no wealth. He's in debt. Everybody's suing him. And he's like, well, Nate, I have no time. Like, you got to go in and tell her there's no money and that we're not getting scammed by her. And he goes in to sit with her and realizes she didn't know about this and that she is struggling. And he holds her hand and comforts her. And it's like the polar opposite of the David character.
Yeah.
As a funeral director. And
Yeah.
you can see that he has no motivation for income, or he has, they're just very opposite when it comes to that as business people, because
Sure.
we find out they have read the will at this point. They go to read the will, and that they both are now these opposite sides of the coin that both have 50% interest in this business now. And that's kind of the course of this episode, is figuring out what do they really want.
Mm-hmm.
And ping-ponging back and forth. One wants to own it, one wants to sell it, the other wants to own it, and then that one wants to sell it. And what do we really do here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then Federico's in there as the other part of it. I love him. He is such a underutilized in these first parts. Like, you don't realize what a big part he's going to play later.
Sure. Yeah, no, he's a great character too. And it really, I think I said this in our recap of the first episode, but it does such a good job of showing the employee-employer dynamic too, from like multiple different angles. Federico doesn't own any part of the funeral home, but they put him through mortuary school, and he's worked there for I assume several years by that point, and he's really is kind of part of their family. And it's almost, you almost realize that he's kind of being disenfranchised in a way through this process too, because that Mr. Fisher was his mentor, and they worked closely. You may even be able to say they had not a better, but a different relationship than, he did with David. And, it's kind of like he's kind of just forgotten in all of that, and just becomes, well, he's just the embalmer, when he's way more than that.
Way more. In this episode, we start seeing Claire's love interest a little more too, and diving. I feel like we really just start opening up some of who the other characters are and who everybody is, which of course that's what a second episode is going to do.
Yeah.
And you start seeing the secrets more. I feel like that's such an underlying. I kept, as I was taking notes, I was like, more secrets, secrets, more and more secrets. And when Mom goes to go, she says, I'm going on a walk, with her little secret lover that told him, and breaks that off with him. And I had forgotten if she's like how that storyline played out. So I was like, ooh, what's going to happen on this walk? Because I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think she just was guilt, and that, and I, having gone through the will and realized that like all the money was hers, it's kind of like almost a second life beginning for her that I think she is excited about, but can't really openly be excited about it yet.
I wish I like kind of expected that she would move out of the funeral home. I mean, she starts saying, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to answer phones. I'm not going to, but she has lots of money that she gets in this will. But I don't think the thought ever crossed her mind, why don't I move away from this business? Why don't I go get my own apartment? Why don't I go get my home? Why don't I go start my new life? If that's what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
But instead, she just stays.
Yeah.
Right in the thick of it.
That is interesting. I think, that, I never really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, she absolutely could have gone anywhere and done anything, but I don't think she ever had options.
Yeah.
Really. And so it doesn't occur to her to, I can leave. I can go do whatever I want now. That doesn't really start occurring to her till later in the series, because I think up until that point in her life, she was just always doing what a traditional, spouse and housewife and all of that would have done. And why would you leave your home?
Well, I think I don't remember if it's this episode or the next one, where she says, I have never been alone.
Yeah.
She went from being, as a teenager, getting married. So she went from her parents' home to her husband's home. And that's just what she always did. So I think part of her is probably terrified to exit away from the kids, away from this marital home of where she's only ever lived, and to go do her own thing. I think at this point, she is still very scared of that.
Yeah.
Which is sad. She seems so confident and so strong, but I think she's so broken in many ways. So I'm looking forward to watching her journey again as we rewatch this and seeing where she ends. Because I forgot so many little things in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then tell us about Nate goes on his first removal in forever to the nursing home. I think they brought in
everything. I know.
Stereotypical thing in episode 2, I feel like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he rolls up to the nursing home and he doesn't know what he's doing or how he's supposed to do this. And he's just like, is somebody going to help me? What's happening here? What do you mean? I just put the body on the cot and leave, and he just fumbles, through the whole thing, and is very uncomfortable, obviously. And, essentially has not received any kind of training. It's more like, oh, you own the business, go do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of how he gets thrown into it. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're starting to do transfers, the first one you do on your own is terrifying. Even if you're going to the hospital morgue and they're already, in a body bag or in something, and and it's very easy. I think it's just really, I remember, some of the first transfers I did, I just you do this stuff, you sign them out, whatever you have to do at that place, and you go and you put them in the back of the van, or it was a Suburban for me. And I thought, they're just going to let me leave with this person. They didn't ask to see my license. They didn't ask to they just believed me when I said I'm from whatever funeral home. Okay, sign here, bye. It's it's just me and this guy now in the back. What? It's just, you just become very aware of the fact that oh my God, I'm responsible for this person's loved one now. And I'm just I'm 20 years old, terrified to drive a mile over the speed limit, because at that point,
that just reminds me of how I felt when I had my first baby and I was in the hospital there, and they're like, okay, it's been 24 hours or 40. Here you go, take this kid and get out of here. And you're like, but wait. Yeah. You are trusting. You're just literally just sending me home with this thing now that you're supposed to take care of. What are you doing?
Yeah. No, I think it was very much like that, and I think it was somebody that was there with him, and they were helping him do something, and they made some kind of not really off color comment, but a very casual comment about, oh, they got, you running these now, just something like that. You know what I mean?
Well, Federico was there for a minute with him.
Okay.
On that one. I think the next episode was when someone was like, hey, did you know the dad?
Oh, maybe that's
right. And he goes, yeah, I really didn't know him well.
Yeah.
But Federico was with him for a hot minute, because we find that his wife works at that nursing home, and they're like, yeah, I give you a lot of business. You should be nice to my husband, kind of thing, she says.
Yeah.
And we see on that, the sheet kind of falls to the side, and his genitals are exposed, and he's kind of erect, and they cover it back up, and he's like, oh, that's called angel lust. It happens all the time. And I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah. No, it does not.
Like,
maybe in other places. Not I could tell you that's not something I've seen
no,
all the time by any means.
no. And I think angel-less, like by definition, is a man who gets an erection in death, but it's in a very specific, like strangulation or like some very specific tragic death cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like 90-year-old Vern who dies at the
Right.
nursing home of natural
It's not a
causes.
normal biological process that happens. It's
a muscle response. It's like a smile. People don't die typically by a smile. That's not, you just don't get an erection to get an erection when you're
right.
dead. It just doesn't happen. But I thought that was funny they threw that in there. It was like, hey, how many sensational things can we have happen in one episode with a dead body? Because then that body starts also kind of making noises in the back of the van, which I've never had a body just laying on a table making noises. It's typically if I'm like rolling.
When you're moving, and it's just air in the throat usually coming out. It's kind of like that kind of thing. Or to be honest, Kari, I can't recall. I'm sure it's happened, but I can't recall somebody just like farting. You know, I mean, if you're moving them, maybe like air will come out one way or the other, but it's not like they're in the back of the van just, passing gas the whole way home.
No, and it's not like they're making loud audible, even when they are making noise out of their mouth. It's more like like a heavy exhale, not so much it going over vocal cords. That's almost like death rattle to me, which is when they're dying sound, not so much after death sound that I have heard.
I've heard a little bit. And again, it's mostly when you're moving them or even when you're like setting features in water, sometimes can get in there and make that noise. But no, I mean, and someone asked on one of the Facebook groups, I think it was today or yesterday, how many times have you seen a body sit up or a body move? And it's like, who started this rumor?
Well, my uncle's cousin worked at a funeral home back.
My grandma's friend was a hairdresser and she said they would sit up all the time. And I was like,
I'm like, shut your mouth. That doesn't happen. Like 120% of the time that doesn't happen. There's not enough physical exertion coming out of that body, air expelling or anything for a body to sit up.
No, not at all. No. But yeah, I mean, it's making noise back there and it's, freaking them out and this or that. But no, in reality, sometimes if you're moving, so somebody had, there might be a little bit of a sounds like they're like something's coming out, but it's just air moving, it's not anything like that.
And then in the middle, he goes to have a glass of wine with Brenda.
Yeah.
And so he parks and gives the car to the valet and says, put him in the shade. I'll be back. Yeah. I'm going to have a quick date with Brenda.
Oh gosh. Now I will admit when when you're driving somebody across the state, we've stopped for lunch and, have kept an eye on the vehicle. I think that that's okay to normalize. I don't know that I would go somewhere where I couldn't see the vehicle from wherever I was sitting for 20 minutes. And I certainly wouldn't have like a long, lunch date in a restaurant. I'd probably like sit in a booth by the window at McDonald's and scarf down a hamburger while staring at the car, or get something in the drive-through and sit in the, in the shade in the car and eat. But yeah, I mean that I've done that, on long trips somewhere. But yeah, I don't know that I would just give it over to a valet and go sit in like an actual restaurant.
I don't remember where the conversation happened, but it was about kind of taking those long road trips with deceased. Like, what do you do if you go to the hotel? And this one man said, I bring the cot into my hotel room at night. He goes, I can't leave him out in the car. So I just bring the cot in and park it over in the corner with the deceased so that I know he's with me or she's with me for the night. And he's like, it might seem a little odd to people, but if we sleep in the funeral home and there's bodies, like, what's the difference?
I have taken many a nap in a visitation room. Yeah. Honestly, with somebody in the casket, because it was 1 p.m. and the visitation started at 4 or 5 and we set him up early and I just needed 30 minutes. Like I have slept in many many a room. And I lived in a funeral home, and
Mhm.
they shared a wall with the prep room.
Yeah.
And I would come out of my apartment, and that's where they like staged the people that they brought in overnight. So I'd literally open my door and have to like push cots out of the way so I could get out of my apartment. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's it there's nothing too crazy about that. I can certainly understand wanting to take that extra step and make sure that, that person was safe, or the car wasn't stolen, or the garage didn't catch
Right.
on fire or something. Yeah, and maybe it sounds weird. Like, why would you take somebody's loved one up to your hotel room and just put him in the corner? But,
It's
I
like
mean,
if that
I
was
don't
your
know.
mom, wouldn't you rather I bring her to my hotel room so she's safe if I have to be driving overnight or
I
have
don't know. I mean,
her?
some
But
people might think, well, that's crazy. What are they doing with them in there? Nothing. They're just in the corner on the wall. But like,
uh,
it's the one time that something happens. And then it's going to be
right.
like, well, why did they just leave him in the car? You can't do anything right. If
No,
you bring them inside to keep them safe, you're a creep. If you leave them in the car and the car gets stolen, you're a bad person because you weren't, keeping
exactly.
custody of them. So what do
You're
you
damned
do?
if you do, damned if you don't, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, I think, with that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
one thing about this episode that drove me bonkers. They're talking about caskets a lot. This $9,000 casket that ends up, Nate says to the widow, how about I'll let you just rent it and we'll put him in it and then he can be cremated after. Well, he doesn't realize that once you put the body in,
It's not a rental
it's
casket.
not a rental
Yeah.
insert, it's a one-time use. You can't resell that casket
Correct.
legally. And so he does that, but because they're discussing this all the time in this episode, they do not use the word casket. They use the word coffin. They're not the same word.
They're not the same. I know that. Oh gosh, I know.
The technical writer on this episode failed miserably, drove me
I don't,
nuts.
yeah, that, and oof. And again, I don't know. Maybe back then they were using them more interchangeably. I don't know. I didn't start, directing till the early 2000s. So I don't know what, maybe in that area they had coffee. I don't know. I mean, I guess I could make a million excuses for them, but yes, it absolutely
Yeah. It's
makes
just the
my
Hollywood
ears
version
bleed.
of the words. It's like saying corner when
Yes.
there's no corners even in the
Yep.
state, or
Totally.
coffin or memorial service when it's really a funeral, or corpse,
Yes.
cadaver when that's not the right
Yes.
term for the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's better
A
for
coffin is a Halloween decoration.
yeah.
And we, you can get a Trappist, which I think is a true coffin. It's like a priest, casket is
If it's
technically
shaped the right way, it's
coffin.
got to be six-sided,
Yeah.
a solid lid,
Mhm.
typically that can be
Yep.
broken in half, but it's all this one piece that
Yeah.
defines a coffin. They're
Sure.
used in England, and European is more traditional, and we can
Mhm.
get them here, but
Sure.
we get
The
caskets.
things that we use 99% of the time are caskets. They're just a different, they're truly two different pieces
Yeah.
of merchandise. But again, they have to maybe sometimes use words that the general public would be more familiar with. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. I don't remember if, like, as the series goes on, if they keep using that word or if they stop, because in the next episode they call somebody a casket jumper. They don't say coffin.
Right. I don't know if it was just that part, and it wasn't the whole episode. It
Mhm.
was just in this a couple different scenes where they
Yeah.
just started using it, and that's what they used for the whole scene. So
Yeah.
it's like whatever writer was writing that scene almost is what they were choosing to
Yeah.
use, the words. And then the casket markup, they talk about that and it being like, it's a $3,000 casket and they mark it up to 9,000, which is an extreme markup for caskets. Typical is like 1.5 times,
Mhm.
maybe sometimes
Mhm.
two, but a lot of funeral
Mhm.
homes don't even do that much markup
No,
anymore
you don't.
because we don't sell as many caskets. So their
Right.
service charge is higher.
Sure.
Not so much back then, though. They would have had much higher markups than you would now. So I think that part of it has not aged with the
No,
history at
no.
all.
I mean, as consumer preferences change, where you put your, your markup changed, as and some funeral homes still haven't done it, but that's
Yeah.
that's how you do it now. But what's always been interesting to me about funeral service is, people, they marked up the casket. This Every piece of clothing I have on my body is marked up more than a casket. This coffee cup is probably marked up 15 times, and a casket's marked up 1.5 times, and we're bad people. Like, it's just it's always been one of those things that bothered me, is just the negative viewpoint that us charging for our services or marking up for merchandise is somehow shameful or unethical, when it's like, well, how do you think we pay our bills to exist? Like, you
Right.
have to do that. But it is interesting, when it comes to caskets, it's like, oh my God, they marked it up twice.
God
Every
forbid.
piece of fiber that is on my body as I sit here doing this podcast is marked up more than twice from the manufacturer.
I
Like
mean,
that.
shoot, look at coffee. Do you know,
Right?
coffee costs like 10 cents and it's like
Yeah.
$12. So wine, the markup on wine is insane. I can
Oh
buy,
gosh.
one glass sold in the restaurant almost pays for the whole bottle.
Well, how much did this stupid iPhone cost to make? And my dumbass paid $1,000 for it. You know what I mean? But it's like, but it's true.
Right.
Suddenly someone's dead, and it's unethical to do the same business practices that we do in every other business.
It's not an item you buy by choice, though. I think is the
Correct.
biggest is
Sure. Oh,
I am
sure.
being forced to buy this casket because someone died.
Yes. It's like, nobody's happy to give us money at the auto shop. Nobody's
Right.
like, oh, good, I get to go spend $1,000 at the auto shop today because my car, did this or that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the businesses can't exist unless they can
Have a
afford
markup
to.
of some
So,
kind.
yeah, but it is funny that he just assumed that you could just rent a casket and do that, and that's a very big no. You cannot
Yeah.
just reuse a casket. So I wonder if they did that on purpose to make that point, or why they didn't even offer a rental casket, or if it was kind of what the thought process behind that being a plot point was. But I think it's a good one, honestly, because it does kind of show that whoa, we don't do this, y'all.
Right.
Public may think that's not okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's more of the behind the scenes and
Mhm.
a little sensationalized, but a little accurate. Some of it, I guess, is kind of what they're going for in
Yeah.
the picture. But
Yeah.
and we end this episode with Nate goes on the run through the cemetery
Mhm.
and goes to see Dad's grave, and we see that the headstone is there already, which
Mhm.
super fast,
Mhm.
which doesn't ever happen that fast.
Very fast.
And I loved what it said on it, even though the dad's like, man, it could have said better things. It was like husband, father, and caregiver.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked that they included his role of what he had done for his life's work, because it's not just a punch the clock career, it's a life's work career. And
Yeah.
kind of liked that.
Did we talk about when they went and saw the coach that
They go, yep, after the cemetery, they go, they drive over to go see the hearse. So yeah, go ahead and talk about
that. And that's so they go, to kind of see the vehicle. And again, it was a brand new hearse, or coach, I guess. Sometimes I'm just trained to say coach now, but and they go to to see it and see the wreckage of it, and there's still blood inside. And it's one of those things, I think, that people forget about those traumatic deaths, is there's this, your loved one ends their life in your home, and everybody leaves, and that blood's still on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody thinks about that. Like, this stuff doesn't just disappear. So now it's like, okay, you have to come and get the stuff out of the car, while the insurance appraiser isn't going to clean the blood out for you. So and it can be very traumatic, especially, and I think we in funeral service deal with this too. It's like, do we give them back the clothes from the coroner as we got them? Do we wash the clothes? I don't know. What, I've struggled with that myself. I can tell you, is like, do I just take it upon myself to wash these clothes that has blood on them because this person died traumatically before I give them or offer them back to the family? Or do I give, or would they rather have them that way? I don't know, but it's an awkward question to call up, hey, how are you doing today? We got the clothes back from the coroner. They're covered in blood. Do you want me to wash them, or do you want to see? Like, what do you say?
Yeah.
But I think it was a good scene to have, because a lot of people don't even have any concept of the fact that in those kind of traumatic deaths, there are things that the family has to see and has to deal with that we forget about, because we get the body from the coroner, and we forget the fact that, okay, well, now they're going back to their house, and this happened there. Maybe there's paramedic supplies all over the floor. Maybe there's, even if it's a home hospice death, there's equipment, there's still things there that nobody takes care of for you.
Right.
You have to do it themselves. And for them to then have to see that for their own dad, I think was powerful.
Well, and we see after that when Nate's going to leave, he's with Brenda when he says, "Hey, I gotta leave." And she goes, "Well, what time are you going to go get the title out of the car?" And she says, "Bring your cell phone with you." And the phone rings and she says, "Meet me at this intersection," or whatever. And she gets off this bus and they get on the bus. And she says, "This is the bus." And Nate's like, "What gives you the right to do this, Brenda?" And you see Dave go like sit down, and that's his first time where he's actually feeling all of it. And it's like she knew that he needed to see something outside of maybe his normal, what he sees as a funeral director, to help him connect. But man, that was ballsy of her to do.
It really was.
Because that could have gone way a different way.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just interesting that the two brothers need very different things. And again, because David, having been in that industry so long, it's almost desensitized to the normal triggers of grief or the normal things, because it's just part of your day-to-day life. And I can tell you, when my own dad died, it was very businesslike for me. The things that, seeing his body did nothing for me. It didn't. I had no real reaction to it. Getting his death, the things that people that don't work in the industry, that would be difficult, moments along that process for them. Really, not all of us are the same, but at least for me, they weren't, because it was just work. And it wasn't until Father's Day the next year that I actually cried. Because I was so just like the normal, I guess, grief triggers in a funeral process don't do the same thing for us sometimes. And I think that was true for David. Just it was work, even though it was his own dad. He needed something else to really be able to get where he needed to be. So but it could have gone the wrong way for sure.
When my niece was killed, I remember even a year later or 2 years later, all of a sudden getting hit with these big waves of grief that I think most people would feel during that first year. But because so much had been shut off, it was like, where is this even coming from? I don't even know what's triggering it, but it's like, it's got to come out somewhere. But how do you open a door that you really want to keep closed to maintain your professionalism with everything else? If you open that door, will it take away your ability to do your job? And I've seen that happen with directors. I used to work with a funeral director. His wife died and his daughter's best friend was murdered. And after that, he was never the same director. He either was emotional or he was angry. He would be like, are these people ever going to leave? Or, he just got really jaded by everything happening. It was like that perfect edge he had was gone. He just couldn't. And he moved away from the business into another area of doing stuff for the business, just not working with the families. And he was probably the best funeral director I've ever witnessed because of how meticulous and amazing. He just was amazing. But he just kind of lost that edge that I think we have to keep to work with families and work in such an emotionally fragile time with them.
But ultimately, we're individuals and we all are going to deal with things differently. And even though we chose this, this path and this career, when it hits close to home, we're still just as lost as everybody else. I don't know anything more about grieving than anybody else does, and how I may react to. It could be, it could be for somebody that they're reliving that death every time they meet a new family,
Right.
and for other people, it becomes kind of like their special thing. Like, and I don't, that it's maybe special isn't the right word, but I worked with a woman who lost a young child. And after some time, she decided she wanted to come back to work, and she wanted to meet with every family that lost a child. That became almost like her ministry in a way to help those families because she had experienced that. And I know a few people like that. A good friend of mine here lost her son to suicide, and it heals her in some way to work with those specific families. But for other people, it's like, reliving that person's death every time you have a new family, and maybe they can't. And
It's
that's
like a
okay.
trigger for that trauma almost.
Yeah.
For some
Yeah.
people, I think. So,
Yeah.
well, that's kind of how this second episode ends, the will. And yeah, share your thoughts about this episode with us in the comments below, guys. Let us know what maybe we didn't touch on in this episode that seemed to be something important you noticed or questions you have. Come back to help us watch episode 3 next.
Yeah. And Kari, if they put comments or questions in the chat, we can look back and answer them in future episodes. So don't feel like because this episode's over, you can't leave a question. We'll go back and read them and kind of do a Q&A.
Well, we can do like a roundup of season 1.
Yeah.
Full questions maybe we didn't talk about at the end. Which that would be a good way to kind of conclude each season, is maybe touch on some questions people have asked on the videos. So check back in with us and watch out for the rewatch of episode 3 coming up. Bye, guys.
Bye.